I'm Claire Fields, and welcome to Claire's Controversial Kitchen, the at-home cooking show where I tackle a potentially divisive and even controversial recipe while talking about a controversial issue surrounding our food. Today's recipe is one that has deep roots in Catalonia, Spain. Balancing sweet and savory flavors can be traced back to the 8th century in this area, but the star of our show comes from the European discovery of the New World. Chocolate was introduced and incorporated into many traditional recipes to help build an earthy and rich flavor. Today we're going to attempt to beautifully combine this chocolate and these prawns. And this actually brings me to today's topic, prawns. Today we're going to take a look at the policy, government regulation, environmental concerns, and much more to talk about if we can sustainably and ethically consume prawns. Okay, so today I'm going to cook these prawns in a nice, rich, chocolatey sauce. And I've told some family and friends about this idea. Some people loved it, other people said it was absolutely terrible. But I think, considering that prawns are generally a sweeter seafood, it'll be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the tails of all these shrimps while I introduce our controversial topic. So the food we eat no doubt has an impact on the environment and the livelihood of millions of people. The fishing industry comes into question a lot because we aren't just raising and harvesting these animals, we're actually collecting them from the natural environment. When we look at prawn fisheries in particular, fishing is done towing trawl nets through sand or mud. Using trawl nets is often controversial because fishers can catch unwanted animals or they can disturb the natural environment. An alternative is prawn farming, which on the surface offers a way to harvest prawns without impacting the natural environment. However, these aren't without issues either. Prawn farming can greatly impact water quality and be a source of land degradation as well. We also could buy our prawns locally, regionally, internationally, and it's important to discuss the issues with each of those. Another alternative is to not eat prawns at all. If there's issues with farm raised and wild caught, is it best to just not consume any prawns at all? As we'll discuss, the answer is never that simple. Now, in this conversation, we have a lot of different stakeholders, and by that I mean a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions because their values and their priorities lie in different places. As with any conversation, it's important to consider all of these sides and try to come up with a conclusion that works for everyone. So I've got all the tails off of these, and I'm actually going to keep them because there's a lot of flavor in there we don't want to miss out on. I'm going to turn it into a broth to use in this recipe. I'm just going to salt and rinse these and then leave them in the fridge until later. In order to make our broth, we're going to need onion, tomato, celery, parsley, prosciutto. Let's chop all those while I talk about our first stakeholder. The first group I'm going to start with is what I call the environmental vegans or vegetarian. These are people who choose not to eat meat or animal products based on the idea that it's the better choice for the environment. So on a very basic level, there's science to back this up. However, it's a complex issue because diets vary so much even within vegetarianism or veganism. People have to get their protein from somewhere. Focusing on eating whole grains, nuts, and legumes certainly has a smaller environmental impact. However, it gets a little bit trickier when you introduce things like fake meat and processed products. The process of making these products is actually protected and private, so the studies that we do have on it are done by the people who make it themselves. However, research that's been done with the information we do have backs up the idea that it's better for the environment than real meat is. So it's safe to assume that vegetarianism is the more sustainable option, but can we really imagine a world where we cut out our meat consumption or even just cut it down? This brings me to our next stakeholder, the consumer. Food is such a beautiful source of culture. There's nothing quite like having a meal that reminds you of your childhood or a treasured family recipe. It's difficult to tell people to avoid a food item if it's been around in their family for generations. It's a source of connection. Here in Australia, prawns are an integral part of a Christmas dinner. Indigenous cultures have relied on eating prawns and other seafoods for many of years. It's what they have access to. In Louisiana, prawns are a staple in many Creole recipes. And the list goes on around the world. If if you simply tell people stop eating prawns, you're likely not going to get a huge amount of change. You're completely ignoring the needs of the stakeholder, the consumer. Rather, we need to find better and the best ways to consume them. Okay, so I'm just going to cook this onion down a little bit, maybe like 4 or 5 minutes until it's translucent and aromatic. Now let's take a look at government involvement. Theoretically, the government has everyone's best interests at heart, right? So what they say goes. Realistically, we know that industry lobbying has a huge sway on the government, but we can generally assume they are working to protect Australia's domestic businesses and waters. The Australian government puts a lot of money into the protection of natural resources, realizing that millions of people depend on it for food, work, leisure, entertainment. The Australian Fisheries Management Authority funds research to improve fishing practices and identify appropriate fishing levels, seasons, and zones. They also place regulations on the equipment used and require licensing for fisheries. So now I'm going to chop up this prosciutto and talk about the fisheries themselves. Fishers have created their livelihoods around prawn fishing. It's impossible to just say no more eating prawns because now what are they doing for work? These guys rely on it, and for many it's a family business that's been passed down for generations. From their point of view, they want their businesses to be both sustainable and profitable. They have to make money, but they also want to be able to pass this business down for the next generation of fishers, and even just ensure revenue for the rest of their lives. A lot of them will tell you they do a lot to protect not only the prawns, but the natural environment and other species. They follow fishing allowances, use bycatch excluder devices, which are little devices that go on the nets and will deter other species. They also have to follow zoning, so they're not allowed to just fish anywhere. They have certain areas, and they're tracked using satellites. There are certifications they strive for to set themselves apart as a sustainable fishery. One of these to look out for is the Marine Stewardship Council Blue Label. Some of the requirements are no destructive fishing practices, no forced labor, and no shark finning. Fishers are audited for sustainability and effective management of their fisheries. Again, it's in these fishers' best interest to strive for these certifications because research shows that consumers will actually follow these labels and be more likely to pick that item up because of the label when grocery shopping. Okay, these onions are starting to get translucent, so I'm going to add in the rest of our ingredients and cook them just for a little bit, long enough to release all their flavors. I'm also going to add in our shrimp tails. I'm seasoning this with some thyme, a few fennel seeds, and a bay leaf. I'm feeling confident. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just stirring these a bit, making sure everything hits the heat. So I'm going to transfer this mixture into my sauce pot. I'm going to make the broth with it. I'm just going to do about 2.5 cups of water. Now I'm just going to let this simmer. It doesn't take hours like a chicken or a beef broth might take because the shrimp tails will release their flavor super fast. And if you can get your hands on shrimp that are completely shelled, I would throw those shells in here as well. So now we're on to our next stakeholder, farmers. But first, I'm going to toast these almonds. They're just slivered. Like any other food source, prawn farms have had their share of a bad reputation. The goal of these farmers is, of course, to make money, but also to keep up with the increasing demand for prawns. The Australian Prawn Farmers Association has a huge emphasis on fresh, sustainably grown, and healthy prawns. They're confident in farmers' water management techniques and point out that Aussie farms don't carry out large-scale mangrove destruction. However, that's not the case all around the world. Most consumers enjoy farm-raised prawns, and you've likely seen them at supermarkets. However, some more attentive consumers might say that they're not quite as flavorful as wild-caught prawns. Okay, these are nice and toasted. I'm just going to let these cool down. I'm just going to chop up my last few ingredients while I talk about my last few stakeholders. Here I've got fresh parsley, some garlic, and I've also got chocolate. Now I don't want this to be overly sweet, so I'm sticking with a 70% dark chocolate. The next stakeholder is conservation groups. If we look over at the Australian Marine Conservation Society, or to quote their website, the voice for Australia's oceans, we can get another sense of direction. They're made up of conservationists and scientists who advocate for evidence-based solutions to issues like this. They actually have a great seafood selection guide online that can kind of tell you what they think is the best way to consume your seafood. They say to choose farm-raised prawns over wild-caught prawns because they're confident in the wastewater treatment that Australia's farms use. And while they say that there's no research to indicate that we're overfishing prawns, they're instead worried about the bycatch, which basically is other species that we catch that we don't intend to. So in the case of prawns, those nets and fishers often catch sea snakes. Remember when I mentioned bycatch excluder devices? Researchers are actually working on a new excluder device that will target sea snakes and hopefully improve the fisheries. Now there's a ton of information on prawns, and that's because people eat them all over the world. They catch them all over the world, and they farm them all over the world. In this conversation, I've mainly focused on Aussie prawns, but I definitely think it's worth touching on our international stakeholders as well. Australia imports both fresh and frozen prawns, primarily from Asia, and these are readily available at supermarkets. It's a little more difficult to analyze the environmental impact of these because they're coming from different countries with different regulations. This isn't to say that all imported prawns are terrible for the environment, just that it's a little bit harder to trace the supply chain. For consumers, the simple truth is that imports offer an affordable way to get your prawn fix. However, many countries have come under scrutiny for unsustainable practices. Even further, there's been reports of human rights breaches with heartbreaking cases of modern-day slavery being used to peel and devein prawns into the perfect, ready-to-cook form we're used to. Now that's a harsh and dark reality, but it's important to be aware of it. That way you have the power to make a better decision. Okay, now I'm just breaking off this dark chocolate, and I've also got the garlic roughly chopped. Okay, so I have those almonds chopped up, and now I'm going to throw in the garlic. So now I'm just throwing in the dark chocolate. So I'm going to add in a little bit of this broth to that food processor. Okay, now I'm just going to strain my broth and combine it all together. And as I do that, I'm going to give you a horizon scan, or basically an overview of what we can expect with prawns. Should we be eating them? Is it possible to eat them sustainably? And we're going to look a little bit at the future. As a reminder, our overarching question is, can we sustainably and ethically consume prawns? As I said before, there's not going to be one correct answer. You can look over all the information presented and try to come up with a solution that works for you. For some, this may be not eating prawns at all. You might think, eating prawns is not that important to me, and I'd rather not navigate the field of finding sustainable and ethical prawns. Plus, it's generally better for the environment to reduce animal consumption. For others, you might not be willing to give up prawns, and that's okay. Clearly I'm in the same boat. But how do we do it in a way that's sustainable and ethical? I bought my prawns from a local business selling prawns from local fishers caught in local waters. I feel confident in my decision, knowing that I'm supporting people in my community, and I feel a greater sense of connection to my food, knowing that it was caught in the same waters that I swim in, sail in, and overall just enjoy. My choice is based on supporting the local economy, trust in the sustainable fishing practices used, and I love knowing that my food was caught fresh daily. I'm going to let the sauce simmer to thicken up for a little bit while I cook the prawns. So I'm using the same pan that I did for the almonds, and I'm just going to fry the shrimp for just a couple minutes. I'm just going to lightly salt and pepper these. People may prefer farm-raised prawns. Australian farmers are managing their farms sustainably, and you may feel more comfortable knowing you're having a lower impact on the environment. No matter what option is right for you, if you do choose to consume prawns, I'd opt for prawns with the shells and the tails on them, if you can find them. You're going to get so much more flavor from the shells and the tails, and you know that no one was forced to peel them for you. I'd also only look for Australian farmed fish. We know the regulations and we know the working conditions.
Looking at the future of prawn consumption, we know that the demand for prawns is increasing, and prawn farming is expanding to meet that demand. Researchers are working on breeding the most profitable and disease-resistant prawns to improve the industry, and advances in the wild-caught industry are focused on minimizing the effects of trawl nets themselves.
I added the chocolate sauce. I'm going to add the parsley and just cook it over medium heat for about 4 or 5 minutes. It's not bad. I almost feel like it needs to be sweeter.
Really?
Like the chocolate is super bitter. Okay, overall, it was not bad at all. I feel like it's got something missing though. Like it's not quite there. So I'm going to add some red chili flakes. I feel like that spicy chocolate is a really good flavor combination, so I feel good about that. And then, like I said, it just needs to be a little bit sweeter. I feel like that's weird to say, but it's how it's tasted. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of raw sugar to it and try it again. So overall, not a bad recipe. I wouldn't say I would make it again, but it definitely was fun to make, and I like trying out new flavor combinations, so I'm glad I tried it. Anyway, I hope you learned something new and you got to watch me make this. If you want to do your own research or learn anything else, I put all my resources in the description. Anyway, thanks.